Hello and welcome to Season 4 of On the Irregular with me, Java Berry. In previous seasons, I've chatted to women from all walks of life about their unique creative journeys, how they got here and how their story has shaped their creative process. For this season, I wanted to specifically explore the way in which grief informs the creative process, how transformative it can be, and how it weaves its way through our lives in many tangled ways, how it manifests in our work, and how we navigate the endless twists and turns. I cannot wait for you to hear these conversations. Each one moved me in a profound way, and often made me laugh and cry simultaneously. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to On the Irregular Season 4 on creativity and grief. In this episode, I talk to photographer Jo Ritchie and writer Laura Mcdonagh. We talk about their work on Projecting Grief, a collection of stories and portraits from individuals who have found comfort, distraction or hope in a creative pursuit after losing someone they love. We also talk about how they came together creatively, their own experiences of grief, and how it has changed them in defining ways. The power in sharing your own story of grief and the things we gain through loss. Welcome to my conversation with the utterly wonderful Laura and Jo. A warning, this conversation contains swearing and the odd bit of background drilling from the workmen next door. Thank you so much, Jo and Laura. Welcome to On the Irregular podcast. It's an absolute joy to have you here. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Morning.
So to begin with, would you like to tell me a bit about your story? Of course, you have your own individual stories, but I'd be interested how you came together to work on your project, Projecting Grief.
So Projecting Grief started after my brother died in 2017. I'm a photographer. I was a photographer then, and basically I couldn't see myself getting back into a kind of creative space again and kind of going back to work and you know, I do quite a lot of portraiture, so you know, half of that job is making other people feel comfortable in front of the camera, and so yeah, it was not kind of where I felt at the time, and I, you know, spoke to a few different people who I met through either kind of other people that had been bereaved who I already knew, or you know, my parents set up a charity, so we met other people through that, and found loads of people who basically used a creative practice as their, you know, lifeline in grief, and kind of were either producing work specifically about their grief, or were just using it as a distraction or just to help in some way. And that kind of, you know, I found that really inspiring and kind of quite helpful, I think, for me to think, oh well, I will be able to feel kind of creative and go back to that sort of work again. So yeah, and naturally I think I kind of started a project out of it, basically. So I started taking their portraits, teamed up with a writer who had to take a step back, and we during that time had interviewed Laura, and so Laura came on board. Was it 2020 that you came on board?
I was interviewed in 2020 and you came and took the photos in 2021, and then I joined last year, actually. Yeah, about 18 months ago now.
Wow. And did you know each other before that? Had you just got in touch to be part of the project?
So no, we didn't know each other at all. I had seen some press about the project. So my mum died suddenly in 2019, December 2019. And I was completely blindsided by it. She had a brain hemorrhage, and it came out of nowhere. She had no warning signs, there were no symptoms, no nothing. You know, she was a very fit, you know, able, capable woman. And then, so that was December 2019. And then, of course, not long after that, we went into lockdown.
Yes.
And in lockdown, so yeah, like my recently widowed dad moved in with us. He lives up in Newcastle. We're 2 hours down the road in York. So it was a really odd time. And obviously I had 2 young children at the time. I've got 3 now. But, you know, obviously they were at home, they weren't in school. My dad was living with us. We were working from home. It was just a really strange time. And I started to do some writing. So my kind of backstory, I was an English teacher. Then I worked abroad for a few years. And when we came back, I became a freelance copywriter. You know, I had the kids by that point. You know, had a bit of a what I thought was, you know, I suppose, given the context at the time, what I thought was a big life change. You know, little did I know there were bigger life changes to come. And so I started to, like I said, been an English teacher, and I would have said that I was quite a kind of tentative creative. You know, I was quite like a frustrated creative, I suppose. In some ways, I'd kind of done these jobs that sort of danced on the outside of creative things, but I was always, you know, waiting for the perfect conditions to sit down and write something. And given the kind of bomb that went off in our lives in 2019 and 2020, that just all went out the window. So that was really when I started to write for myself and to write about family. And kind of my thing is narrative nonfiction, life writing, memoir, whatever you want to call it. That's like my jam. And so that's what I was doing when I came across Projecting Grief. Somebody actually sent it to me through Instagram and said, oh, you might be interested in this. Like, I see you've kind of been doing a bit of writing. And so I got in touch with Jo, and she and basically said, this is my situation. It was featured on the project. And then, as Jo was saying, in 2022, when Faye, the previous writer, took a step back, said, would you like to get involved? And yeah, I couldn't say yes quick enough, really.
Wow. It's incredibly beautiful. I've been looking, because you have the online exhibition on the website, but then you had a real life physical one, didn't you, in Leeds this summer, didn't you? It looks absolutely stunning. And it's really beautiful how your the photography, there's something very frank about the photography and the way you bring out the stories from people that really is very harmonious, the way they play between each other. It's a really beautiful way. Like, there's, you know, because the portraits are, they're just something very clear and quite simple and pared back about them. And then, you know, to be able to draw that out from people as well, their stories is a real skill. It's incredibly beautiful. I would encourage anyone to have a look. How was it having the physical exhibition this summer? How did that go?
Oh, it was amazing. It was so nice to be in a kind of physical space. And yeah, we ran some creative workshops around as part of the festival as well, which, being in that space and doing something like that was, I mean, it was exactly what it was even more than we'd envisaged, wasn't it? It was it was absolutely perfect. And being able to actually have those kind of real life face-to-face connections as well is so important.
Yeah, I could imagine that. And how I'm interested, because of course you come with your own experiences of grief, your own personal stories. How has developing this project and working on this project, how has that affected your own grieving process? Because, you know, it's an ongoing journey. It doesn't ever go away. You don't kind of grieve and then put a lid on it and then that's it, that's over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know, there's something very powerful, isn't there, about sharing these stories, and for you to be connecting on such a profound level with people, sharing their stories of grief and their thoughts on grief. And, you know, because the bits that I read, I was like, gosh, I hadn't thought about it, or like, that's exactly put into words what I've tried to express but not quite known how to. Like, how has that felt for both of you?
I think, well, from my viewpoint, I think, so people talk about grief work, don't they? I think there's always, like you've just hit the nail on the head there, there's always work to be done with grief. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to, you know, it's not just going to magically disappear. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. And at the exhibition, when we launched the kind of real life exhibition, I mean, we had, like Jo was saying, we had so many conversations with people and so many conversations with people. And obviously there was a whole kind of spectrum of lived experience in that room. You know, some of our sitters made the journey up to Leeds to come and be part of that night. And Rick, one of our sitters, he played the piano in the venue, and it was just magic. It was so incredible. And I ended up speaking to so many people, but there was one guy there who I hadn't met before. I'm not actually sure what his connection was, whether he was connected to the PR agency or the festival organisers or whoever they were. But we just had this incredible conversation that was, you know, about his experience. And at the end he went, oh, he says, this is amazing. You know, there's no small talk here. There's only big talk. I was like, that is spot on. And that's how I mean, from my viewpoint, because I, obviously doing the interviews and speaking to people and then turning what, their words into these kind of 600 word standalone pieces that accompany the portraits. There's no small talk in those conversations. It's all like the real deal. And, that you don't, in your everyday life, you don't often have those conversations, do you? But I feel like I used to think that kind of, as a woman, birth was the kind of childbirth, and child rearing was like the big sort of divide in sort of lived experience. But I've completely changed my mind on that now. I think it's going through an experience like, we've all been through, and having those conversations with people. I just think it's like another level of connection.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I remember somebody once, when we lost our daughter, I remember someone saying, "Oh, well, you're part of the club now," and it's a pretty devastating club to be part of. But I understand now, kind of about what she means by that. You kind of see life in a whole different way. There's like you kind of see behind the veil in a way, don't you?
We went to a talk the other day where they talked about the empathy gap, and it being, you're on either side of this empathy gap, and suddenly you do have just this whole different take on, when people tell you their story, you've just got this different level of empathy with them.
So true, yes, of course. Yeah.
But with the project, I think people think that it's going to be, quite sad, and like that it's kind of, I find anyway, and me and Laura have had plenty of conversations about this, I think I can speak for her too, that like actually we come away from shoots or the interviews feeling quite uplifted, and these kind of shared connections, even though they are about something really sad and really horrific, the stories are supposed to be positive. These are people who are surviving and who are doing something with their time and who are finding hope in something really positive. And that's that's what the whole thing's about. And so actually I think, even though it can be heavy, and we get plenty of emails that come in that you kind of take you back for a second, but actually people want to tell their story and want to make that connection and want to help others and want to show the world what they're up to, even if it's kind of something they're doing in their spare time, or if that is their job, and that's kind of what they're doing very publicly. I think that's interesting. That's something I've really noticed with them putting the call out for this series of the podcast, was how generous people have been with their stories. That's really, really taken me aback, just how much people really want to share and want to, I guess, help others feel less lonely possibly, and and even just the energy and where you go emotionally when you come to sharing your story. It's a lot, but it is quite extraordinary. The same, like how I've experienced the generosity and the kindness of course you find something in sharing your own story, but it does feel like an act of giving by putting your story out. And it's so true what you're saying about how you think, it's going to be really sad, but same, like when I was looking at the website and looking at these beautiful photos and the stories, it's so beautiful, and there's something incredibly uplifting about it, because like you say, like you don't have to turn everything shit into something beautiful. Sometimes just shit things happen and that's it. Absolutely.
But it is quite incredible to witness, to see people that I think one story, I can't remember his name, I think he's a spoken he's a performance poet.
Rohan.
and his mum had passed, and he was talking about how he was struggling to process it, and therapy, and then through therapy they said try writing it down, and then it's kind of just taken on this whole other life and opened up a whole life within him, and creatively it's extraordinary and beautiful, so beautiful.
No, that's been exactly the story with so many people as well. And even if it is just that it's opened up a kind of hobby that they can turn to and that they can do, to make themselves feel better on an evening, or just to pass a bit of time when you're feeling a bit crap. So I think or it then has changed people's lives, the direction of people's careers, and it's opened up a whole world of other possibilities.
And for you personally, so you were saying that you were a photographer before losing your brother. I'm so sorry. Has it since then, like you said, that you kind of found your way again, like kind of a way of processing it, and by meeting these people through your photography, has it opened up any other areas that have surprised you in terms of creativity, or what it's brought out in you, or how you've wanted to express your grief or what you've been going through?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't until someone actually sort of pointed out that the project had become my sort of creative outlet that I hadn't really thought of it like that. You know, I was kind of just motoring on, doing the project as just a natural way for me to be, I don't know, going back into photography. And someone's like, well, obviously this has become your way of, you know, dealing with your grief. Oh yeah. So I don't know, but I mean, I don't, because I'm not a writer, hence why I definitely was like, when I started it, to kind of put it out publicly, I was like, I need a writer to putting like the context into these stories. So but at the same time, like when we ran the creative workshops, we were there and kind of, I was taking pictures to kind of make sure we had a record of it, but Freya Bromley, who ran our creative writing one as part of the festival, it was amazing, and I'd never thought about going and doing something like that. And the way she ran it, and it wasn't patronizing, and it wasn't kind of like you had to have done writing and know what you're doing at all. You don't have to be into literature, you know, you can come just with a pen and paper. And the way that she ran it was kind of getting people to go on a journey, and it was, you know, really basic stuff, but was amazing. And like everybody had written something by the end of it, and so there was so much of it. Just seeing that, I was like, maybe I could do some creative writing, you know. And it actually, that's kind of a little bit, I guess, what we're trying to do with the project as well, is sort of show people like you don't have to be a creative person, you know, in air quotes, because you know, so many people go, oh, I couldn't possibly, like, I'm not creative. And you don't have to be a creative person. You know, you can just, and you don't have to be bringing something fully you know, we've all got these traumatic stories, but you don't have to be, you know, like you said, bringing something that's so awful and making it beautiful. You can just be doing it for the sake of doing it. Someone that spoke about how as adults we don't play anymore, you know, because you're so busy and you end up working and you've got children or whatever, other life gets in the way. And like actually going and just being creative for a little while, be it sewing, painting, pottery, you know, doodling, like that's play for adults, isn't it? And I think it's a really useful tool.
And you know, it's for everyone. You know, that's why we were so keen at the exhibition that we had to have those workshops, that we had to, you know, and they took a bit of careful planning really to say, like, what can we do that is accessible to everyone? There's got to be kind of minimal barriers in place here, because people do have that, oh, but it's not for me type attitude, or can have that attitude. And, you know, if you look at the website, if you look at the online exhibition, there's all kinds of different creative practices represented there. And that, again, is one of the fundamental things that we're trying to do with the project. You know, we've got Tony, who, you know, is an artisan rocking horse maker. Like, clearly that's not the most accessible, you know, a creative pursuit that you're going to find. But, you know, we've got kind of amateur painters, and we've got you know, like the example of Rohan that you've already mentioned, somebody who started a journal and has gone on this journey to become a performance poet. And they're all so inspiring in their own way. It's incredible really, when you look at what people have done and what they've, you know, just, and the courage really, you know, the creative courage that they have often found, not always, because some people that we speak to are well-established creative artists in their own right, you know, before their, you know, experience. But some people really aren't. And, you know, for me personally, I find those stories so compelling.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, in some ways it's I think one of the reasons why I wanted to really explore this for this season was because when I started the podcast, it was about, I guess from my own experience of kind of figuring out my own creativity and feeling a lot of shame about not having followed a linear path in terms of, you know, I hadn't gone to art school and then, you know, started working for a studio or what have you. I'd gone to drama school and later on in life as well. And then, you know, took on lots of different twists and turns. And then it wasn't really until we lost our daughter that things kind of came back to me, and I wanted to explore drawing and writing again. And so because of that irregular journey, I was like, well, there's so many people have these irregular journeys, and you often come to things much later on in life, and, you know, maybe have thought all their life, oh, I'm not a creative person or what have you. But then because of different things that have happened, then they found their way there. And something that kept on coming up, people often would talk about loss, and whether it would be loss of a relationship or a career or a family member, a loved one. There were so many different reasons, and I kept on coming back to grief and just how transformative it can be. And like you're saying, you know, it can awaken things in people that maybe don't think that that's there. And it comes from a place not of creating a product or creating something that's, you know, that's deemed as good or whatever. It's just a need to express something and get it out and kind of pinpoint it in whichever medium, you know, and whether that's, like you say, knitting or writing or painting. I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating how through loss you can create, you know, the creation can come from there. It's an incredibly painful route of creativity, but, you know, it is what it is. It's part of it, and, you know, it's life and death and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just listening to you saying that, I can definitely relate to what you're saying there, and about the kind of, it's interesting you call it like an irregular route or a non-linear route, and, you know, I kind of feel that in some ways that's maybe the only route there is. But, you know, I definitely used to feel, when I was kind of teaching or when I was doing kind of copywriting, and before losing my mum and before really having the courage to go, I thought, well, I could be creative, but in order to be creative, it would have to be in this very specific route, and I would have to produce 80,000 words of writing that then gets turned into a book and is picked up by a conventional publisher. And, you know, that is the conventional route. And then all of that goes out the window. But what I find really interesting as well is some of our speakers who talk about exactly what we're speaking about here, you know, that kind of, well, Stacey, one of our sitters, puts it really well. She said after her husband Greg died, she felt bulletproof for 6 months. You know, she could do anything. Yeah. But she also speaks really eloquently about the payoff for that, you know, and the payoff is her husband is no longer here. And she talks at the end of her, well, not at the end of her interview, but at the end of the piece on the website about, you know, there's a lot of caveats, but she is a braver person, a more creative person. In some ways, she would describe herself as a happier person. But then immediately on the back of that, she says, but there are so many caveats. I am a more traumatized person. I am a more, so, you know, it's this kind of weighing scales, isn't it? Like this balance, this payoff between the two. We posted a new story yesterday, Natalie, who's a theatre maker, and she lost her mum, and she had quite a difficult relationship with a complicated relationship with her mum. And, you know, she says again at the end of her piece, I would, you know, I'd give anything to have you back, but I'm also not sure that there's space for you anymore. Oh, wow. There's an awful lot of space I'm going to have to fill with me. So again, it just really hits at that trade-off.
That's so interesting.
And so well put as well. Both of those sitters just had the knack of really pinning down that conflict. It was really
I think
powerful.
Everyone does. That's one thing that a lot of people say, if like they go on and read the quotes and read the website, and they're like, oh, I haven't got anything this profound to say. And it's like, actually, it just comes out in conversation. Like, you don't realise, you know, because you don't all sit there kind of thinking about it the whole time, thinking like, right, well, I'm going to go and do this creative thing because I know that this will make me feel better. And this, I mean, some people do. Like Nick in his story on the website said that this was his way of smashing grief. He was like, right, I'm going to listen to all the episodes of Griefcast. I'm going to write this play about my dad and then I will feel better. And it's like,
actually, grief complete.
Yeah. Exactly. So of course it doesn't work like that, but it, you know, you realize once you're having conversations how much you are getting out of things, or you know, or people have seen the project and gone, oh yeah, actually I'm doing that and my story's this and that's, and then we've ended up speaking to them. So So it's an interesting journey, isn't it?
Wow.
Definitely.
And are you going to continue indefinitely? Do you have?
I think so. Well, we constantly still either, we're screenshotting people and sending them to each other being like, we should speak to this person, or we get emails. It's probably about 50-50 now of people that we speak to is that they've contacted us or we contact them. And I think we just love doing it, and we seem to be getting a really great response still. And we want to tell as many stories as we can. So, we want to have as broad a range of losses, as broad a range of creative practices, just as broad a range of voices as we can, really. It's we're both still doing it with no funding, so we're doing it kind of on the back of our regular freelance jobs and lives and families and stuff. So it's it's still slowish moving. We've still got a waiting list all over the country.
Wow.
But we've been really lucky to kind of have the exhibition that we had this year, and off the back of that we've been in touch with so many different organizations who are either interested in featuring the exhibition, interested in doing a kind of another project that's similar or kind of under the umbrella of Projecting Grief, with running some creative workshops. And it's kind of it feels like the start still of something that's going to grow into more. But as well as doing all these other things, we still want to be doing the project as well. Like we still want to be kind of releasing stories and speaking to people. So
it does feel like a life project. It's because of course, I mean, there are as many stories as there are people, and
exactly.
There's definitely no shortage of material.
Yeah.
No.
Sadly.
Yeah. Gosh. And so in your into separate work, what do you do? Because you both, of course, like you have your freelance work, and Laura, you a copywriter, and do you want to tell me a bit more about your work and also your creative projects aside from Projecting Grief?
So I started freelance copywriting, like I said before. My background was English teaching, and I taught abroad for a few years. And when I came back, it was just such a huge culture shift, and I was ready for a change, and I was having my second child. And so I decided to go freelance about 7 years ago. And I always say my kind of focus is education, charity, the arts. That is my happy place. That's where I, really sort of thrive. And I do some, I have my regular clients, and then I have some standalone projects. My regular work, I do quite a lot of work with Irish in Britain organisations, so my family. So one of the things, when I started to write for myself in 2020, the thing that I was really obsessed with writing about was family, identity, that particular experience of the Irish in Britain, which is a really distinctive experience. And it's not one that's really that kind of written about or known about. So I kind of all the time, whether it's as an English teacher or as a copywriter, before my mum died, I felt I was kind of creeping closer and closer and closer to actually doing the writing that I wanted to do. But obviously my mum dying was the catalyst then to actually get on and do it. So my kind of content writing, comms work for those organizations is for me, it's really meaningful. It feels really purposeful. But on the side of that, I'm also I'm still kind of writing the life writing family type pieces that I was writing back in 2020. So I've kind of been placed and won a couple of competitions in that area, and I've had a couple of things published. But that, I always thought kind of pre-mum dying, in the sort of abstract, it'd be lovely to write things, but the only way of writing something is through that very conventional route. And actually, that's not the case at all now. I've actually found the kind of joy and satisfaction in the process, because there is nothing else. You know what I mean? It's, you've got to be enjoying doing the thing is the big, very obvious sounding lesson that I've learned. But nevertheless, that was the lesson. And then, so I've just kind of, obviously we did the Projecting Grief exhibition. Projecting Grief is kind of a big chunk of my creative time and energy. And then I've also just taken part in an exhibition for recording some oral history of Irish in Britain community members for a big Irish in Britain exhibition, which is touring at the minute. So that's where I kind of really find my satisfaction. And I feel in a really good place now, where I've sort of followed the things that interest me, and I seem to have this like really nice intersection now of, kind of client work and creative work that sort of feeds each other in it. It's all kind of the opposite of a vicious cycle, whatever that is.
That sounds like the perfect balance.
Yeah, and it's a really good combination. I am lucky.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. No, I really enjoyed just looking at your website and looking at your blog, and very funny, very, very funny.
Thanks.
It's very kind of down to earth and creative and quite silly in some ways, but also with quite fundamental truths as the kind of the thread through it all. No, it was really lovely. And Jo, would you like to tell me a bit more about your photography? Because of course I was looking at your website as there's your beautiful portraits, but then you also photograph food, and you have a very clear style. Have you always been a photographer?
Yeah, pretty much. I kind of, when I was about, I don't know, 15 or 16 is when you kind of, people start asking you like, what do you think you're going to do with your whole life? So sort of hold on to something. And I held on to photography because we'd got one camera in the art department at school, which would pass around every 6 months. So, and it was when, kind of my first year at uni, actually, we studied, we did all the darkroom stuff and a lot of analog photography and learnt the more traditional things, which obviously loads of people are going back to now as well. Which I would love to do, but it's just so expensive to do it. So actually commercially it's quite difficult to do it. And you kind of have to, like, I always questioned why I would be doing something like that, and actually I think it would just be to kind of join the trend and the fashion of going back to film photography, rather than that I actually love it, because actually it's a bit longer process for me. So I do kind of similar to Laura. Actually, I've been really lucky that I think I've found a good balance now of having a personal project which really feeds into all my other work. So by doing portraiture and photographing people who are kind of, making and doing stuff, is just a dream to go and be able to do. To go into other people's creative spaces and take their picture is, a real privilege. So it's a really nice thing to be able to do. And I do a bit of food, which I think falls into that category as well. Definitely photographing chefs at work and photographing what they produce is just amazing. So I do a bit of that sort of stuff. Occasionally it's in print, which is always nice. Do a little bit of editorial stuff for kind of the Guardian and Sunday Times magazine. So it's a really nice balance, and I really like, obviously being freelance is always kind of, it's a bit of feast or famine. It's that up and down constantly, but when you're in a good swing of things, it feels like it works. And everything does sort of fit together quite nicely. And actually, a lot of people that then book me for other work have seen Projecting Grief and are like, I really love your personal project. So actually that's a really nice thing to be producing and to kind of have as a body of work as well. Which is really meaningful as well. It's something that kind of we clearly love doing it, because otherwise there is nothing else feeding it, because we're not getting paid for it. So it's it's something that is there that we constantly as well, me and Laura end up on the phone at least once a day when we're, especially in busy periods like around the exhibition, we were constantly speaking to each other. But it's something that we love doing, and I don't know, it's become a real passion project. It's something that I think even if we never get any money for it, I think we would still do it forever, because it's just it's not work at all. It's it is just wonderful, and it's all about making connections. So and that's also an incredible skill that you both clearly have, that in both your forms of telling these stories, that you, Jo, can allow people to feel comfortable in front of the camera,
that there's, that they look, they're easy, and that their story can come across, and that you, Laura, can draw those stories out of people. That's also a huge part of the project. It's not just like you're a photographer and you're a writer, you're storytellers and you're humans, but clearly you have an empathy and a softness that allows people to feel safe to share their stories with you and to open themselves up, which, is incredibly powerful. Not everyone could do that. So, and that really comes across.
Thank you. Well, I think it's the sort of thing that when I started this, I knew that anybody who I teamed up with has to have also have been bereaved, because I think there's a shared understanding, well, like we said about the empathy gap, there is just that level of, and it just, I think, and this is not the case for everybody, I know there are plenty of people that do this as their jobs and have not been bereaved, and work in hospices or charities or anything like that, and they are brilliant. But personally, when I had people kind of, I did a little bit of counselling after Jack died, and I just found it a little patronising, and because I was like, well, you don't understand because you haven't been through this. So, and there is an element that, and it doesn't have to be the same bereavement, it doesn't have to be the same person in your life, the same way that they went, it's just that element of just this huge life-changing shift that I think
so true,
that just changes the way you speak to people.
It just feels safer, doesn't it, to open up to somebody about that very sort of about that experience. And it's such a vulnerable thing to do. I think you can only do it if you feel like you're on really safe ground. And I think because both Jo and I are really upfront about our personal experiences, that's what creates that safe ground. We're just really straight about it. And people think, oh, I can tell this story. And actually, like we said at the beginning, I think often people want to share it. In some cases they're waiting to be asked, because there's so many forums where those stories aren't welcome. People don't want to hear them. People don't want to see your they don't want to hear about your awkward feelings, and that's just how society functions, isn't it, to kind of keep things going. But once you've been through that experience, that I always say, like, that there's nowhere for it to go. You can't push it down and kind of hide it. It has to come out at some point. What's that book? The Body Keeps the Score. Like it's there whether you like it or not. So
it is wonderful that you are offering this platform and this space for people to do that, and to recognize their story, and for them to be able to share that. It's really.
We do constantly have to caveat that we are not trained therapists.
Well, this is another thing.
But it is,
it's a really, really important point.
We're telling people stories, and we are kind of, but we're not here to give any advice or kind of anything other than a shared experience, because, we can only go off our own experiences and kind of work with people like that, I guess. And, we're there to sort of tell people's stories, but we're not, we're here to, we can signpost people to various different things. Like we made sure that, especially for the exhibition, that we had good signposting in case anybody was affected by anything that they'd read. And we've got a resources page on our website which hopefully signposts some of the places that people can go if they really feel like they need some extra help. But actually, again, a lot of people came away from the exhibition feeling quite uplifted and feeling quite moved in a good way, rather than a traumatic way.
No, it sounds like it really. And the fact that you had workshops as well, that's such a wonderful way of drawing people into it as well. So it wasn't just simply something observed, but a way for people to take part and explore things. I really, really mean it. It's just the most beautiful, stunning, powerful piece of work that you've collected, and really
That's
stunning.
Really kind, thank you. Well, no, thank you for having us, and really amazing.
It's a joy
for us,
to talk about.
Really lovely.
Yeah, it weirdly is a joy to talk about, isn't it? An unexpected joy. You can find Projecting Grief online at projectinggrief.com and on Instagram at projecting_grief, or head to the show notes for links. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of On the Irregular on Creativity and Grief. Please remember to review and subscribe, as it makes all the difference in helping other listeners find us.